It's a Wednesday morning on your feel-good breakfast show, Expresso on S3. Thanks so much for joining us as we continue to celebrate the citrus industry right now by reflecting on some of the latest news there. Now, earlier on this year, the European Union announced highly controversial regulations on citrus imports from South Africa. Now, the new rules were met with contention from local citrus stakeholders like the Citrus Growers Association of Southern Africa and the Department of Agriculture. Now, after some talks, the initial new rules announced by the EU have been suspended to only take effect after the 31st of December 2022. So, Dion Ubat from the Citrus Growers Association of Southern Africa joins us to talk about the latest developments in this story, and a man who I can very proudly say is very proud as a representative of the Citrus Growers Association, very passionate. As soon as these oranges arrived on set, your eyes just lit up. Why are you so passionate about them?
It's a fantastic industry. Monica, firstly, thank you for having us on the show. We really appreciate your time. I think the citrus industry has got a fantastic story to tell. The industry, when I joined it about 8 years ago, were exporting about 110 million cartons. Last year, we exported 160 million cartons.
Wow.
And the difference in income was something between 8 billion then and 30 billion last year in terms of foreign income. So it's fantastic. And for each 10 million cartons we grow, as an analogy, we put 10,000 new jobs on the table.
Oh, my word.
So if you make the calculations, we've just added 50,000 jobs in South Africa over the last 7 years, and mostly in rural South Africa. So you know, it's such a diamond, it's worth to fight for.
Absolutely.
So South Africa had a fantastic story to tell. We've been extremely successful, and this new regulation, unfortunately, deals with a risk factor or a mitigation issue with regard to a pest, which already we have under control. And so the unhappiness in terms of this discontent we have is the fact that if the EU would decide that false codling mod is a problem, you would say, okay, we're looking at false codling mod across the board. And this regulation is only applicable to citrus. So the biggest, call it the perpetrators on false codling mod, something like flowers or capsicum, aren't affected at all. And if you look at the difference is, we export 800,000 tons to Europe. And in the case of these other countries, they do up to 264, or they have 100 tons.
Yes.
So it's virtually at a 1% of our volume. And at the same time, their interceptions of this false codling model is tenfold ours. So it's discriminatory, disproportionate. You can have lovely words to describe all of this. But the good news is that the Minister of Trade and Industry, Mr. Patel, has taken the EU to court on this new regulation. And there's consultations today and tomorrow in Geneva. So we really hope that that rolls back the regulation, or it softens the impact of that, because it's the first one we really have, which would be a barrier to trade.
Right. So as it currently stands, I understand that there's a suspension of these suggestions by the EU, or the proposals they're putting forward, until the 31st of December. What's the latest news right now?
Well, we had sort of interim measures which we had to deal with, and that cost us about 264 million this year in terms of addressing it.
Wow.
But if it should stay in place, it means we're going to pick up a permanent tag of about 305 million annually, which goes with the already implementations that we have. We have a risk management system for citrus, of course, to have it. It's a great product. It tastes well. It's like great wine. If you have something like that with, it's got a high acid, high sugar, and just like good wine, it gives you a long palate. So that's why South Africa's citrus is so well revered and sought after. So at the moment, we're carrying a terrible burden of, in our opinion, we call it cosmetic measures. It's not really plant health or public health induced. There's no problem there. So the issue for us is the fact that it's a little bit of it's protective. The Minister of Trade and Industry called it and said this is just a protective measure. It's got nothing to do with a plant health.
Right. So my question that I have now is that, you know, given that you've already spent as an industry so much in trying to fight back against these measures, and that's currently only resulted in a temporary suspension, very little control can be exercised over the sovereignty of other regions in the world.
Of course.
And so, should the worst come to play, you spoke about risk plans that are in place.
Yeah.
What can local growers do to continue to survive this wave for as long as it may last? And I might be putting you on the spot, but I'm going to squeeze you for an answer right now.
Are we into religious? Because they could start praying if we want.
Certainly.
No, look, I think there's a very good chance. We think we've got a great case, and there's 8 points which are taken as the... And the good thing about the consultations now is when you do a court case, you have got 2 teams coming in, and then you principally look at each other's case. So for the first time, the EU has said, look, we're giving you this regulation because of that.
Right.
We say, well, we think this is disproportionate, it's not horizontal, all the other issues, and you look at each other's case. Usually, most of these things are settled by way of some compromise. So we dearly hope that the current consultations tomorrow and Thursday would lead to, call it softening or rolling back portion of it. So a risk management system in terms of making sure the fruit is excellent and good and not a problem for plant health, that's normal.
Yes.
And there's nothing wrong with that. And we subscribe that, in fact, the current one in South Africa are rated as the best in the world. So we really got a massive, excellent performance of risk mitigation up to now. Wonderful. So we'd love to. I mean, the Europeans have, over the last 8 years, bought 56% more of that fruit than those grapefruit that you have there, than we had in 2014. We went from 44 million cartons to 66 million cartons in less than 7 years.
Wow.
So the housewife in Europe thinks this is flipping fantastic.
And I'm sure that sentiment has not changed. And I must say, I'm feeling very confident with the likes of you at the helm leading the charge in defense of our industry that is not just contributing to the economy back home, but clearly to the tables of Europeans and people all around the world because we produce such fantastic ones.
Do 2 to me. This is a product you won't get your hands on. It usually goes outside, so eat it now.
Well, we're about to eat it right now in the kitchen. Dion, thank you very much.
Pleasure.
It's my feel-good breakfast show.
Welcome back to your Feel Good Breakfast Show on this Wednesday morning. As always, a pleasure to be in your company as we continue the discussion about the protection of our citrus industry. Now, with the initial shock and horror of the new EU regulations announced earlier this year on South African citrus fruits abated, how optimistic can we be for more favorable long-term adjustments to the EU regulations? Well, international trade lawyer Rian Geldenhuys joins us to discuss this a little bit more. And earlier on, we were joined by Dion Uber from the Citrus Growers Association. He sounded like he was very optimistic, and I guess I'll save that question for a little bit later on. But right now, how sensitive in terms of time is this issue? There are disputes currently going on. Is this a very time-sensitive issue?
Yeah, I think it's an extremely time-sensitive issue. We should be cognizant of the fact that when the EU imposed the regulations, it was in the middle of our season.
Yes.
So some of our products already arrived in their ports. And as long as it's sitting there, we've got to pay something that's called demurrage fees, which is essentially a penalty for not offloading your ship in time. And then, of course, it's a fresh product, so it can deteriorate. So all of these are risk factors for destroying the products as they arrive there. Luckily, as you now know, we've got a suspension agreement. But then the second part of why it's really time is of the essence in this matter is the fact is the regulations take a while to adhere to. So, there's a certain amount of things that they have to do, taking up to 25 days per producer in order to adhere to the regulations. So that's one aspect. So the system needs to change within producers in order to adhere to that. And then, of course, an important aspect was also they require phytosanitary certificates from the South African government. And for government to change also takes a long time. They need to have a system in place in order to provide those certificates for the specific regulation that the EU has imposed. And that's why it's really important to get that resolved as soon as possible.
Yeah.
So we're ready for the season when the season should come.
These phytosanitary certificates you're talking about, exactly what are they meant to change or address? What is the issue at hand?
So the regulations are trying to address something that is called false coating moth. And what they essentially try to do with this particular insect is they're trying to protect plant health. So within the phytosanitary environment, it's either health or life of humans, animals, and then also of plants that you're allowed to address. And that's what they're trying to address. The strange thing about it is they've addressed it previously in regulations that we've had to adhere to for years.
So as it stands, we've had systems in place that address the very issue that's being brought up.
Precisely, for exactly their regulations. And what they've now done is they've upped the ante, made those regulations a bit more onerous, so it's more difficult to comply with. And of course, as I mentioned, imposing those regulations in the middle of our season.
So, how would this actually play out? I mean, obviously, is the reason the protection of the European Union's regional production and supply of citrus versus ours? Because, I mean, Dion did mention that we are the biggest exporter to the European Union? Is this what it's really all about?
I would have to say it does look like that, and especially if you look at it from the perspective that we've had regulations in place that dealt with it sufficiently, and we adhered to those regulations, and we had no incidents of false coding, moth coming, and causing any plant health issues within the European Union.
Yeah.
So why change the regulations at this particular point in time? It doesn't really make sense.
Yeah.
And then also you've got to look at it from a legal perspective in terms of what we're allowed to do in terms of the treaty. The treaty allows us to do so when we've got scientific evidence that we base our decisions on. So we already had scientific evidence, and we adhered to those scientific rules in order to then address it.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we also have to impose regulations that they term essentially the least onerous. So again, we've had regulations in place that we adhere to that allowed you to sell. Now they've made it more onerous to do so.
Yeah.
So it would appear that it's purely protectionist.
So far, is the powers that be and our government, are they doing all that they can and all that is possible to kind of keep these regulations at bay?
It's always a very difficult thing to do. You know, once the EU has made a decision, they're known to stick to their guns, and it's very difficult for one country to just, please change the regulations for us.
Yeah, for us.
So I think in this instance, industry and government has done the right thing, and it's the first time that we've done this, as we went to the World Trade Organization, where we initiated the dispute. So that's the first part in trying to get this resolved. So as Dion mentioned, they're currently in consultations, so just friendly banter, trying to resolve the issue in an amicable way. But if it doesn't work, then you physically go into a formal court setting at the WTO, where they are the eventual referee of the dispute, and then you'll eventually get an answer. But typically those things fizzle out. Because this happens on a world stage, the EU would be quite exposed in terms of their thinking and other regulations that might also look to be similar to the one that we're talking about now, and they may then just decide that let's come to a compromise.
Yeah, so there is ultimately something at stake for them as well.
There's definitely
a big spotlight on, like you say, how they do business.
Absolutely.
Oh, thank you very much, Rian, for enlightening us. We really do appreciate it. That's international trade lawyer Rian Geldenhuys, helping us to understand the world of international trade a little bit better, particularly as it affects our agricultural sector with the new EU regulations. Now, on another note, did you know that eating foods that are high in vitamin C, like oranges, which we are going to be consuming a lot of today, it has been shown to decrease symptoms of seasonal allergies caused by pollen from blooming plants. So right now, let's find out who our next lucky winner is.